In this video, I want to take you through a quick animation on exactly what page faults are, and I want you to understand page faults if you're not familiar with this concept, because it's fundamental to the way the Windows operating system works. And if your virtual machines are encountering hard page faults, they're going to be horribly slow, and you're not going to like what you get. So let's talk about what page faults are and how they work. To understand them, you need to understand how Windows manages its memory. So in this instance, we've got a server, and this server has 2 gigabytes of RAM installed. Now at the same time, this server on its 500 gigabyte disk has a 3 gigabyte paging file. Now here's what happens. A Windows server or a Windows machine has RAM memory, and then it sets aside usually about 1.5 times the actual amount of RAM on a file called the paging file on the disk. Now what happens is if we run out of room to store stuff in memory in the RAM, we then write some of that stuff out to the paging file so we can get back to it later. So this paging file is kind of like a fake RAM, if you will. It's just RAM, it's memory that instead of being stored in the random access memory, which is the fastest memory we have on the computer, they write it out to the disk so they can get to it later. Now to further complicate this for a lot of people, well, first of all, let's just look through how this is organized. First thing, your computer is going to set aside about 1 gigabyte to run an OS. Now that's an estimate. It's going to change based on humidity, what operating system you have, the day of the week, and all that sort of stuff, it seems like. But if you've got Windows 7 with normal stuff running, it's going to take about 1 to 1.4 gigabytes just to run and manage Windows. And so that's taken up 1 gig of memory. And then let's say we open up 2 or 3 applications, and that takes another gigabyte of memory for apps. Well, then that means that we've got just very little bit of memory, if any at all, for anything else that the computer needs to do. Let's say one of these apps needs to start storing more information, or that we try to cut and paste something that pushes it past this 1 gigabyte limit. Notice approximately 1 gig here, approximately 1 gig here. We don't have very much memory at all left of our 2 gigabytes. So what's going to happen, we can use the paging file for that. Now, to further complicate that, anytime something is placed in memory, it can just be simply kind of dumped into memory, or it can kind of be registered. There's a part of Windows that actually registers what has been placed in memory, so that when it needs it, it just goes to that address and gets it. And it can do the same thing. If it needs to put something in memory and there's not enough room, like in this example right here, then part of that memory gets written out to the paging file. And part of this memory is used to write the pointers to know where to go get that memory. But here's where the real problem comes in. If we have put some of this memory, notice everything from here up, so all of this square right here is actually stored out here on the disk. So when we need to access this memory, we have to go to the disk and get it and come back. And ouch is correct, because reading things from this disk is much slower, much more inefficient than just grabbing it out of RAM. So that is called a hard page fault. To read this particular page in memory, we had to go to the disk and get it. And it's not fast at all. If it's in RAM, we go out there, grab it, bring it back, very quick. But to do this, we've got to go spin the disk, find it, read it off the disk with the read-write head, then pass it back. It's just a lot slower. Now, that's what a hard page fault is. But now let's talk about a soft page fault. And here's where these can come in on us now. And that is, I've got the same machine, but notice now I have 8 gigabytes of memory. And so I've got my 500 gig disk out here with my 3 gig paging file. We're not going to change the size of our paging file here. But what you're going to find out with larger amounts of RAM, you might not even need a paging file. And you can go out there on the internet and look around at some of the discussions about paging files. And a lot of people at around 8 gigabytes or more will simply remove the paging file from their disk because they don't really need it anymore. Let's look at why. We need about 1 gig to run our OS. Well, notice that uses a whole lot less percentage of the memory than it did at 2. Then we need another 1 gig for our apps, but notice we've still got 6 gigs left. And so then when we start to run anything else that needs memory, notice it just loads it up here. Now if this particular app needs any more data space or memory space, it's got all this right here. So it's never going to write anything out to the paging file. However, if it just dumps something into memory but it doesn't keep track of it, then when it goes to find it, it has to go search the memory, and that will give it a page fault. But that's a soft page fault. Going to the disk would be a hard page fault. Now, your monitoring tools that are built into Windows that we all use, Performance Monitor and those things, won't differentiate between a hard page fault and a soft page fault. It just says page fault. And so if you're assuming that you've got a virtual machine running here, and it's got 8 gigabytes of memory on the host, and you've given it 4 gigabytes of memory on the virtual, and it's showing a lot of page faults, then you'll keep adding memory to the virtual to the point that you basically cannibalize or weaken the host system, and now you've just made your situation worse. So if you get into a situation where your virtual machine's running slow and you just cannot figure out what's going on, you may want to grab VMware Tech Support, start to talk to them, dig around out there in the support forums and so forth. But I just wanted you to understand these page faults and how moving into a world of 64-bit operating systems and a lot more RAM in the gigabyte world on our machines could cause us to misunderstand exactly what were meant by page faults, because always in the past, before we got to these really large RAM amounts and 64-bit processors, page faults were just bad, and we knew it, and we always knew what to do. But the game has changed just a little bit, and I hope this helps you understand what's going on there.